He was just a child, not even tall enough to reach the bolt on the front door without standing on his toes. And yet, in the early hours of that cold, restless night, his small frame lay motionless on the tiles of someone else's home. A place he hadn't been invited into, a place he had no claim to, a place that now bore the mark of a tragedy too layered to summarize in whispers. The neighborhood would wake up to flashing lights, yellow tape, and hushed confusion. Mothers pressed their children closer. Doors that once stood open without thought were now bolted, chained, double-checked. A silence fell over the street. Not the peaceful kind, but one heavy with the weight of unanswered questions. At first, it looked like a break-in gone wrong. A desperate act by a boy many had seen but few really knew. But as the hours ticked by and investigators traced his footprints back to the place he called home, the outline of the story shifted. It no longer resembled mischief or delinquency. It didn't look like recklessness. It looked deliberate. How does a child end up risking everything just to slip inside another person's kitchen? Why would he brave darkness, alarms, and the sharp eyes of a suspicious neighborhood? Just for a bag of bread, a piece of fruit, or perhaps just warmth? The answer, as it turns out, wasn't in the act itself, but in what drove it. What pushed a quiet, observant boy to cross that threshold? What conditions forced his hand and steered his footsteps toward a stranger's doorway? This isn't just a story of a night that went wrong. It's a chronicle of a slow unraveling. A hidden ache no one wanted to admit was real. A sequence of neglect and silence that built up over months, maybe years, until one moment broke through the surface and spilled out for all to see. And yet, in the eyes of those watching from behind drawn curtains, it all came down to this. A boy lying still while red and blue lights spun across the ceiling. A boy who should have been in bed, in safety. Not here. Not like this. What happened that night is only the ending of one chapter. The real story begins long before he crossed that lawn. What made him do it? What forced this boy, no older than a sixth grader, to step into the shadows of a neighbor's house and pay a price no child should ever have to face? His name was Daniel, a quiet boy with big eyes and a shy smile. He walked with a slight bend in his shoulders, as if trying not to take up space. At school, he often sat near the back of the class. Not because he was hiding, but because he didn't like to be seen too much. Still, when called on, he always answered. His voice low, his words careful. Daniel loved drawing. Not superheroes or fast cars, but buildings. Simple houses, trees, fences, rows of windows and wide doors. Places that looked calm and safe. He once told his teacher he wanted to become someone who designed homes. Homes that didn't have shouting inside. He wore the same pair of shoes for almost 2 years. The soles were worn thin. His uniform always clean, but faded and a little tight at the sleeves. Still, he never complained. He came to class on time, handed in his work, and never caused trouble. At break time, Daniel would sit alone. Not because he didn't want friends, but because he didn't know how to ask for company. Some days, another child might sit beside him. They would talk about cartoons or snacks. He always listened more than he spoke. One teacher remembered how he stayed behind after class to clean the board, even when he wasn't asked. When she thanked him, he just nodded and walked out. No smile, no words. Classmates said he was the boy who gave away his pencils. The one who would offer half of his biscuit, even when it looked like he hadn't eaten all day. No one really knew where he lived. They knew his street, maybe, but not his world. He didn't bring friends home. He never invited anyone to his birthday, if he had one. And still, there was hope in him. A soft, steady kind of hope. The kind that doesn't shout, but stays quietly in place, waiting. Daniel didn't stand out. He didn't want to, but now everyone remembers his name. Not long after Daniel turned 8, a new woman moved into the house. Her name was Clara. She arrived quietly with 2 bags and a small suitcase. Some neighbors said she was polite, even friendly. Others said she kept to herself and didn't talk much. No one really knew where she came from, only that she wasn't from the area. Daniel's father had met her through a friend. After his first wife passed away, he became distant, working long hours and barely speaking. Clara came in like a helping hand. First, things looked better. The house was tidier, meals were made on time, and Daniel had someone to check his homework. For a while there was calm. But calm doesn't always last. It started with rules. Shoes off at the door. No crumbs on the floor. No speaking unless spoken to. Then the rules became harder. No seconds at dinner. No visits from classmates. No laughing after dark. Clara watched everything. If Daniel spilled water, she made him clean it with his shirt. If he left a book out of place, he would stand in the corner until his legs shook. Sometimes, neighbors heard her voice through the walls. Sharp, fast, and loud. Daniel spoke less. He walked slower. His drawing stopped. One morning, he showed up at school without lunch. The next week, he came without his notebook. His teacher asked what happened. He said he forgot. He always said he forgot. No one knew what happened when the front door closed. But something had changed in that house. And Daniel's quiet life grew even quieter. Daniel stopped smiling. Not just in photos but in real life too. His voice got softer. His footsteps lighter. He moved like someone afraid to be seen or heard. Inside the house, meals became fewer. Some nights, the kitchen stayed dark. There was no smell of food, no plates on the table. Clara would eat. Daniel would watch. He didn't complain. He simply waited, then quietly walked to his room. The hunger didn't just sit in his belly. It sat in his face, in his hands, in the way his clothes began to hang loose around his small frame. His body was changing, but not because he was growing. Some nights, he would go to sleep cold and hungry. Other nights, he would stare at the ceiling for hours, listening to sounds outside the window. Dogs barking, cars passing, the world moving on. No one visited. No one checked in. At school, he started dozing off. Teachers thought he wasn't paying attention. One thought maybe he was lazy. But the truth was, Daniel hadn't had breakfast, or dinner, or anything the day before. One entry from a notebook found in his backpack read, "Today I drank water and chewed paper. I'm not sure if I'm sick or just tired. Maybe both." He wasn't just being ignored. He was disappearing. Neighbors noticed the silence, the stillness. A few whispered, a few wondered, but no one asked the hard questions, not out loud. And through it all, Daniel kept walking to school. He kept folding his uniform, brushing his teeth, doing his work. He kept trying to be normal in a life that had stopped being that a long time ago. So, did no one notice? Or did they simply look away? There were signs. Small, quiet ones. But they were there. A woman across the street once saw Daniel standing outside the gate, staring at the corner shop. He didn't say anything, just looked at the bread rack like he was waiting for someone to offer it. Another neighbor remembered hearing him ask a classmate for a biscuit one afternoon. The boy gave it, and Daniel said thank you 3 times. Not once, 3 times. Still, no one stepped forward. Some say they thought his father was strict. Others believed the new wife was firm but fair. After all, Daniel still wore clean clothes. He still walked to school. Until he didn't. One week, he was gone for 3 days. No explanation. Then he came back looking thinner than before. His shoes had holes. His eyes looked dim. Whispers started. One teacher made a note to speak to someone. A neighbor thought about calling the authorities. Some say a call was made. A woman, unsure but worried, mentioned the boy's name and address. Nothing changed. Later, it would be said that the case was marked low priority. No visit. No follow-up. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began showing up at the small shops in the early hours. He never asked for money, just stood near the shelves. One storekeeper said she caught him slipping a packet of crackers into his pocket. She didn't shout. She just took it back and told him to leave. He nodded and walked away. A few days later, a faint recording surfaced. Call faint and nervous. "There's a boy. He keeps hanging around my shop. He looks hungry. He doesn't talk much. Something doesn't feel right." The line ended quickly. No address was left. No one came. Each misstep led to another. And still, Daniel waited for someone to notice. That day had been like the ones before it. Quiet, dry, and cold. No lunch. No dinner. Not even water. Daniel had been locked out again. No explanation. No warning. Just the sharp click of the bolt from inside the door. He sat on the steps until night fell. The porch light never came on. No one came to ask where he'd been or where he was going. Time passed. His stomach turned, then settled. The hunger had stayed so long it had stopped aching. He waited. Then, sometime after midnight, Daniel stood. Slowly, carefully. The street was still. Everyone had gone to bed. Except him. He walked down the sidewalk, past 3 quiet homes. Each one dark. No curtains moved. No one looked out. Then, he stopped in front of a house with an open window. The same house where he had once shared a piece of cake during a birthday party. The smell of rice had drifted out earlier that evening. The kind of smell that makes your mouth water and your chest ache at the same time. Daniel didn't break anything. He didn't force his way in. He crept through the back, through a space in the gate, barefoot on the cold ground. He was not trying to harm anyone. He only wanted something to eat. Just one thing to hold him through the night. The kitchen light had been left on. A loaf of bread sat near the counter. Next to it, a jug of water. Cameras would later show his small hand reach through the window ledge. Quiet, careful, quick. But what he didn't know was that someone had heard the noise and had already made a call. That call would change everything. Daniel stepped inside. His hands trembled, not from fear but from hunger. His eyes moved from corner to corner. He spotted the bread. It sat next to a tin of biscuits. The jug of water glowed under the light. He reached out. One step forward. Then another. What happened next took just seconds. A creak from the hallway. A door opened. A light switched on. Then shouting. The homeowner, startled from sleep, rushed in. He saw the boy. Didn't know his face. Only saw a shadow. A figure inside his home. Then came the noise. Loud. Sudden. Sharp. Everything stopped. Daniel dropped to the floor. A chair tipped over. The bread lay untouched. Outside, lights came on. Neighbors rushed to their gates. Some stepped out barefoot in pajamas. They couldn't believe what they'd just heard. One woman covered her mouth. A man froze with his phone in hand, trying to understand. Inside the house, there was panic. A man's voice filled with regret. He didn't know. He didn't mean to. He just wanted to protect his home. Then came the call. Someone broke into my kitchen. I think I hit him. I don't know who it is. He's just a kid. He's not moving. The operator asks for an address. Sirens are heard faintly in the background. The man's voice shakes. Paramedics arrived first. Then the officers. They pushed through the gate, into the yard, and into the kitchen where the scene waited. That night, people thought it was just another break-in. They had no idea what the search would uncover in the boy's home, or who he really was. While paramedics rushed Daniel to the hospital, officers turned their attention to the small, cracked house on the other side of the street. The door was locked, curtains drawn. A dog barked from somewhere nearby. Then an officer knocked, no answer. After a few minutes, they stepped inside. The air was heavy. The hallway was dark. The smell was stale. On the kitchen counter, only a few dirty plates. The fridge stood open. Empty. Not one carton. Not a bottle. Nothing. In the pantry, there were wrappers but no food. The living room told a similar story. A thin mattress lay in the corner. Torn. Next to it, a notebook with scribbles and drawings. Most of the pages were crumpled. One had a list of favorite meals. The dates beside them were months old. The walls were bare. The TV didn't work. There were signs a child had once played there, but not recently. Officers moved to the backyard. They found a bin with old-school books. Some were wet from rain. One had a name on the cover, Daniel A. Neighbors had started to gather outside. Quiet at first, then whispering. One woman stepped forward. She said she always saw him walking alone. Never with his stepmother. Never smiling. Another neighbor said he once gave Daniel water when he saw him sitting on the curb, sweating and tired. He asked where his parents were. Daniel didn't answer. Then, another voice. A man from 3 houses down. He said something that stayed with the officers. I always felt something wasn't right in that house. But no one had spoken up. No one had knocked. No one had made sure. Until now. The story of Daniel's tragic night quickly spread. From one small neighborhood, it reached across the city, then the country. A young boy, alone in the dark, with nothing but hunger driving him to make a dangerous decision. A shot that had left him hurt and changed his life forever. Media outlets were quick to pick up the story. It wasn't just another break-in. It was about the boy. It was about the neglect that led him to that point. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #JusticeForDaniel and #EndTheSilence went viral. Hundreds, then thousands of posts flooded timelines. People wanted to know why no one had noticed, why no one had helped, why no one had stepped in. The public outcry was loud, strong, demanding answers. How could this happen in a community like this? How did no one see the signs? A local reporter asked. This is about more than just the boy who was shot. This is about the system failing him. And the system failed him badly. The pressure grew. People wanted justice, not just for the boy, but for everyone who had ever been ignored or neglected. They questioned how something like this could happen without anyone noticing the signs earlier. Soon, the finger was pointed squarely at the authorities. Neighbors who had stayed quiet now spoke louder. Why had no one reported what they saw? Why hadn't someone called? And at the center of it all, Daniel's stepmother was under fire. Social media posts, news reports, and interviews painted her as the villain. A woman who had not cared enough to protect the boy who had been in her home. But the question lingered in the air. Was this really all about her? Or was there more? What had truly been going on behind closed doors? The courtroom was tense. News cameras flashed as reporters lined up outside. The public was watching closely, eager for the truth. The story was no longer just about what happened that night. It was about everything that led up to it. Daniel's stepmother took the stand. She was calm, composed, too composed. In a voice that lacked warmth, she began to speak. He was always troubled, she said. Always rebellious. Always difficult. I tried my best, but he just didn't listen. She painted a picture of a boy who was hard to handle. A boy who had refused to follow rules. Her version of the story made her seem like a woman struggling to deal with a troubled child. But her words rang hollow to many in the room. Investigation records began to surface. Police uncovered her past. One that had been hidden for years. It wasn't the first time she had been involved with authorities. Reports of complaints from previous homes. Neighbors described her as harsh, demanding, and sometimes even cruel. Documents were pulled up showing past incidents. Times when children in her care had been left hungry, ignored, or worse. The pieces of a disturbing pattern began to take shape. Was this behavior just a coincidence? Or was it part of a larger, more troubling history? She had a history, but no one knew. I never thought she was capable of something like this, a former neighbor explained. People warned me about her, but I never thought it could go this far. In the courtroom, the defense tried to paint Daniel as the problem, but the prosecution was determined to show the truth. They pointed to her history and the years of neglect that had led to Daniel's desperate act. And in the middle of it all, the truth about what had really been happening behind closed doors started to come to light. The trial was intense. Every word, every piece of evidence was weighed carefully. People who had once stayed silent were now speaking out. They had seen the signs, but they hadn't acted. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Neighbors shared stories of the cold, quiet home. How they'd seen Daniel standing outside in the yard, looking hungry and alone. How they noticed that the house was often silent except for the shouting inside. But the most emotional moment came when Daniel's former teacher spoke. He was always so eager to learn. He wanted to be something. He had dreams, the teacher said, holding back tears. But he stopped coming to school. He stopped smiling. I should have done something, I should have known. Her voice cracked as she recalled how Daniel's absence weighed on her. She broke down in front of the courtroom, the guilt and sorrow of missed opportunities clear on her face. She had seen the signs, but she hadn't been able to help him. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every testimony seemed to add another layer to the story. The prosecution painted a picture of neglect. The defense tried to downplay the events, but it was clear that the boy's suffering had been long and quiet. The day of the verdict arrived. The courtroom fell silent as the judge stood up to deliver the decision. Would the stepmother be found guilty, or would the court find a different answer to this tragic story? But there was still one question left unanswered. The biggest question of all. But what happened to the boy? The night of the break-in had changed everything. The boy was found in critical condition. The gunshot wound had left him barely hanging on to life. Doctors worked tirelessly, but there were doubts. Would he make it, or was it too late? Took hours of surgery. The chances of survival were slim, but the boy's will to live was stronger than anyone had expected. He did survive. Months passed, and though the boy's body healed, the emotional scars were harder to treat. Therapy became a lifeline. He had to relearn how to trust, how to hope again. The pain of the past was always with him, but he had learned to find his voice, to speak about the suffering he endured. In the quiet moments, he would write. Sometimes it was drawings. Other times, just words on paper, expressions of a life that had been lost and rebuilt in small ways. Foster parent speaking gently. He's making progress, but it's slow. He's not the same boy he was. He's stronger, in ways I didn't expect, but there's still a lot of healing to do. The boy was placed in a new foster home. The road to healing was long, and some days felt unbearable. But he was safe now. He had food, love, and stability. A future that once seemed impossible was now within reach. But what would that future look like? There were signs. Small, quiet signs. The boy's eyes, once full of hope, began to show a deep sadness. His clothes were often worn, torn at the edges. His laughter, once frequent, disappeared. His body language told a story no one listened to. But no one stepped forward. No one asked. The neighbors, they saw the changes. They whispered among themselves, yet no one intervened. How many others are out there, crying in silence, their pain ignored? How many children fall through the cracks? We didn't notice. We couldn't see the signs. But how many more are out there, behind closed doors, where no one can hear their cries? How many children are suffering right now, wondering if anyone will care enough to help? If you see the signs, if you suspect something isn't right, speak up. Don't wait for someone else to act. The smallest voice can make the biggest difference. The silence must end. It's time to make a change.